Section 11 of the Best Short Stories of 1915. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Mr. Everdeen's House by Arthur Johnson, Part 1. It loomed there, high and large, uncompromised by the gloom of mist about it, unruffled by the easterly gusts that bent the 2 rows of larches which stretched in deliberate diagonal lines from the street to the corners of its grim facade. Hastings could hear the beating of the sea. It was probably in that chaos of space behind the house. As he stood leaning against one of the tall gate-posts and surveying the scene, he began to feel, almost in spite of himself, in sympathy with it. A motor drew up near where he stood. Instinctively his attention was directed from it to the green Georgian portal, which at the moment was drawn in to permit somebody to pass out. She was in glaring contrast to her setting. She was fresh and lovely, young and fashionable-looking. She paused on the wide stone step, glanced up at the sky, opened her umbrella, and briskly proceeded down the avenue to the gate. Within a few yards of it she raised her eyes from the puddled gravel and started back at sight of him. "Jack!" she cried out. "How did you get here? Why didn't you tell me? I am this minute on my way to meet you." "I'm admiring your summer home, Julia dear," he said to her, a little constrained. "It's sad and desolate, and everything that I suppose you want it to be. I expected to hate it. I thought that having spent most of my life away from all this, I should have lost every scrap of tolerance for New England. But ever since I set foot in Rockface—" "When did you, Jack?" she demanded. "An hour ago. I've been in the strangest mood ever since." "Come now and tell me about it," she suddenly saw the need to say, walking away from him to dismiss the grinning chauffeur. Hastings lingered alone in the hall. "It's much nicer by the fire," Julia called to him impatiently from the next room, and he followed the sound of her voice. He moved slowly over to a chair opposite her own and sat down, forgetting to talk. "I vow I'm amused," she exclaimed, "at the way you take it. You've made letters full of fun of me for settling my parents on that ugly little Massachusetts point. You've laid it all down to my Middle Western love of Puritan relics and Eastern culturing, and scorned my romantic inexperience. And here you come, redolent of Europe, to be as much impressed by our choice as if you were a Montana schoolgirl." He smiled back, but it was obvious that he hadn't heard a word. "What's the matter with you, Jackie?" she asked interestedly. "Had a bad journey?" He tried to concentrate his faculties on looking genial and at the same time intelligent. "It was just like me, Julia," he began, the ghost of cheerfulness on his face. "I took the earliest sort of train, instead of the one I telephoned you I'd take. You see, to have landed at night, after all the years, think of it, and then to go walking around by myself, seeing things crop suddenly up that I hadn't thought of since, well, scarcely since I was born. No wonder I couldn't sleep. This morning, like a stranded idiot, I got out at that little way station of yours and realized for the first time that I didn't have a blessed idea where you lived. Rockface is about as enormous as a biscuit. Anybody could have told you." "That's the strangest part of it," recollected Hastings. "You see, I had a curious hunch about it. I felt a little forsaken. I was actually surprised and irritated that somebody, I didn't know who, wasn't waiting to meet me. There was something about the place, Julia," he gravely pursued, "made me feel justified in thinking a hospitable welcome was due me. Oh, I don't mean because you were here, but, well, the veil of sea-turn that half hid the buildings across the square made me feel the need of some kind of greeting. I expected one, right on the spot. Can you understand? And instead, the cold east wind blew round me as if I were an outcast. I stole down the first crooked street I came to. I stared at the house fronts, at the little square panes of the sagging window sashes, at the dingy doors, with those short, steep flights of steps leading down to the sidewalks." Julia sobered to a tentative frown. Jack's eyes were bigger than usual, and he did look, notwithstanding the feverish flush on his cheeks, rather fagged. How she had been counting the days for him to come. It didn't seem possible that the visit which he had been promising for so long to make her should have finally materialized. Wasn't it really an indication, she pondered while again happily she sized up the situation, if he took so much trouble for her, that he did, after all, care more perhaps than she had sometimes thought. But what an extraordinary meeting it had been! He had at once launched forth on this extreme discourse. She sat back and let her eyes rest on him with amused tolerance, her smile attentively adjusted to suit his mood. For her moment's anxiety vanished at further sight of his strong, broad shoulders and the handsome appearance he made in her favorite high-backed chair, his firm hands grasping the arms of it. "You've stayed away from America too long," she said carelessly. "Paris is bad for you." He leaned forward, his delicately modeled cheekbones emphasized by the firelight, his hair becomingly awry. "I knew it would all be as it was," he went inspiredly on. "There was a thick clump of hedge, cold and dreary in the mist, that awoke pictures of a prison I used to dread the sight of when I was I don't know how old. Once I partly thought I must be dreaming, so I put out my hand and touched the wet, sodden picket of an old fence. I looked suspiciously behind me, but there was only an old man behind, fully 200 yards away. Then the idea came to me that it would be a relief to talk to somebody. I hadn't interchanged a word with anyone since I got off the ship. All kinds of impressions, you see, had been accumulating, and they thronged like phantoms about me. I wanted to hear myself speak, to see if I could, so I turned and waited for him to come. The rain was dripping all around. There wasn't another sound anywhere. Now, this is the queerest thing of all. What do you think I said to him?" Jack leaned forward, his eyes darting intensely over her face. "I said, 'Can you tell me the way to Mr. Everdeen's house?'" "Mr. Everdeen's house?" She stood abruptly up. Who told you," she gasped, "that this was Mr. Everdeen's house?" He stood up too, stepping back from her. "You must have told me," he said, aware of his quivering lips, "in one of your letters. The name came to me." "I never told you," she stated emphatically. "I never told anyone, for why did you ask such a question of that old man?" His gaze wandered. My throat felt parched from disuse. It took a distinct effort to make the words sound articulate. "Sure now," answered the old man, while I was still puzzling to explain to myself the question I had asked him. "But never have I heard it called that. Not since my father died from the cold he caught driving the mare up from Portsville. There was a time, in the days when they talked of it being haunted, you'd hear folks call it Everdeen Manor, but not, no, and my father likely's been dead these 40 years now, never Mr. Everdeen's house." "Mr. Everdeen? There was such a person then?" "There'll be a time, me boy, when they'll doubt yourself was a living thing." He straightened his bent back reprehensively. He shook his head. "Walk back to the next corner," he muttered, "and turn to your left. It'll be down there bar the cliffs. If nobody's stolen it, somebody'll sure enough be there to point it out to yer." "I'm a stranger," I apologized. "I really didn't know." "No?" he shouted. "Who was it owned the land this here street runs o'er? Who built it? Who was it paid for the church on the hill? Who did for the sick, and gave to the poor, and got nothing hisself for the trouble but grief and loneliness and a broken heart? Where did you come from?" And he surveyed me as if the mere fact of his seeing me for the first time made him doubt my intentions. Still I stood there waiting. What was he like? What did he do? Who was he? I couldn't help flinging out in my wonderment. "As good as'll ever come back from where you've been, or I pray for the like o' yer, I reckon. Judge not, I tell yer, that yer be not yourself judged." I tried to smile at the old man. "Good day to yer," he grumbled, and walked back in the direction from which he had come. I watched until he was lost in the thickness. Julia looked at Hastings in astonishment. Just another glimmer of anxiety crossed her mind, but any foolish worry she might have had for him was merged in her consciousness of something indeed more staggering. "Do you think," she brooded, "that it can be true that the house was haunted?" "I had," Jack unresponsively continued. "I couldn't help it. On the way a queer loathing of the little village. The gaunt house fronts obtruded themselves so obstinately, so self-satisfiedly, like anemic country parsons, with their eyes close together, giving me a mean, soulless stare. Every object testified to its lack of any temperamental share in the joy of living. The emptiness of the streets seemed pitiless. Their narrowness was oppressive." "I love every inch of it," said Julia defiantly. Hastings was silent. He looked at the dry, colorless walls, covered with circuitous lines of crackling old paint. "Was this furniture here, Julia?" he asked. "Not this," she exclaimed with pride. "No wonder," he argued half to himself. that the next generation preferred black walnut, even with all its grapes and gewgaws. Horrible as it wasn't so orthodox and priggish and mirthless as what came before. He strayed out into the hall again. He viewed its stateliness, its expurgated elegance. "Well, this has got me, Julia, seriously," he said with a surprised realization that she was standing beside him. It's immense." "Oh, that!" she cried out. "From you?" And slowly she stepped closer to say something to him, but she thought better of it. "Don't you think," she just let slip, "I've made it look at least, well, old?" As only a Westerner could want to make it look. His sense of humor affectionately covered any lack of enthusiasm. "Come, Jackie," she urged at last. "I'll show you all of it before lunch is ready." The stairs rose straight in the rear of the hall, directly opposite the main entrance, with its border of finely traceried windows branching squarely to right and left 2/3 of the way up. By the first door above the side whither Julia conducted her guest, she stepped fondly back and announced, "This, Jack, is your room. I hope you will like it." "Yes," he murmured, distractedly gazing about him. Despite the freshness of everything, despite the new woolen carpets with their correct geometric designs, ones Julia had had copied from some battered relics which she had somehow acquired, despite the new chintzes and the recently refinished furniture, so deliberately assembled there for the first time, despite the spickness and spanness of each suitably collected detail of the room's decorations, a musty smell in the air caught his breath. The floor swooped reminiscently down toward the right. The boards of it made a stifled creak as he stepped across them. He himself was a little unsteady. The window gave on impenetrable fog. Hastings threw up the sash and peered out into the dampness. He heard the sound of unseen boats groping their ways through the distance. The water lapped and laved below him. "Jack!" Julia called. He turned to her, dazed, smiling in that way he had of trying to conceal his consciousness of inattention. "Of course it seems plain and spare and rather humble after Europe. I know that." As if directed by her words, his eyes swept rapidly over the room. "It's no use, Julia," he answered. "If you're New England to the core, you can't get free of it. I'd like every drop of New England blood drained out of me, and something, say Hebrew or Middle West," he laughed, "substituted in place of it. To you this is pretty and cozy and cheerful. To me, well, it's like an orgy of blue laws. It's the personification of witch lore, like self-inflicted penance for I don't know what." He glanced at her in excitement, shifting his hands uneasily in and out of his pockets. "Yes," she said slowly. "I had thought, nevertheless, that you might like it." "Like it?" he echoed. "That's the trouble. I wish I weren't so full of the meaning of it all. Can you fancy how a monk might feel, who'd been away on a vacation, just getting back to his cell? Like it? I can't help liking it. It's my proper setting. I see that fast enough. But I've come back to find how inexorable and harsh and catechismical it is. And naturally, I resent being what I am. Oh," he broke off, suddenly realizing the folly of his harangue, and after another moment he added, "It's delightful, Julia dear, really. If only all the Westerners could come to New England and revive it, and all the New Englanders move west and revive themselves." They went on from room to room. "You Westerners," Hastings reiterated. "Oh, I don't just know what the difference is, for you're New England too, only you've got so much else mixed up with it. You've become freelances. Your more recent, less bigoted adventures have made you forget." "What?" asked Julia indignantly. But he was at a loss as he looked about him to explain, however much each new survey of the scene convinced him. "Here," he muttered, "everything has been steeping so long in the attenuated resolutions that drove us to come, everything is still conscientiously soaked, saturated in the barren memory of it." "You're not," said Julia, testily, to draw him out. "Precious little of it you've had. 2 years at a school. You're more foreign than you are New England. Remember, you're—" "Yes, I don't forget I've one foreign ancestor to boast of, and bless heaven for it. How my great-grandmother ever happened to marry— See this." Hastings went on, incoherently catching her arm and waving his other over the exquisite array of her colonial chamber. "Now this, to you, is, well, it's as amusing as if you'd tried to furnish a room to imitate one in Cinderella's palace, as interesting as if you'd done it Louis XVI. Or its meaning is hardly more personal to you than the room you furnished in Munich that winter." She blushed admiringly at memory of their first meeting. "The problem appealed to you, and you made it charming. But to me, you really hate it," said Julia, determined to face the facts. "I really love it," he retorted sadly, "the way you couldn't help loving a parent, even though you mightn't believe in him." "Jack!" She characteristically cried out to him again. "There is one thing more that I hardly dare show you then. You'll think me such a fool. A servant appeared to announce that luncheon was ready. "Don't say anything to them against it," she told him on the way down. That wasn't, however, what made him silent during the meal. He took little part in the conversation, except when Mr. and Mrs. Elliot plied him with questions, which he then found himself answering with only unsatisfactory vagueness, answers that he could do nothing, not even when Julia flew tenderly to his rescue, to make any better. Yes, he liked the house, he said gravely. It was a nice old house, and he thought how murky, despite its new coats of cleaning, was that far corner up near the ceiling. No, he wasn't sorry, he responded, that he had left the École des Beaux-Arts to devote all his time to painting. It was the one thing he was suited for. Yes, his foreign great-grandfather had been a portrait painter. He couldn't remember what his name was. Tremaine? Henry Tremaine, that was it. Julia was looking hard at him. She was gazing down at her plate. He knew he had eaten nothing. He could not eat. No, he wasn't at all hungry. Why was it so chilly, he thought. Doubtless he had picked up a germ. The house, he muttered to himself, was on his nerves. It was so everlastingly gloomy. Julia had re-inhabited it too authentically. Everdeen Manor, Mr. Everdeen's house, what names! An hour afterward he told Julia he was dead sleepy and that, contrary to all his habits, he was going upstairs to take a nap. Dinner was at 7? All right, he would be in better shape by then. He felt wretchedly, but he didn't say so. Out in the hall he paused a moment at the foot of the wide lower staircase. The ticking of a good many clocks came to him from different parts of the house. They seemed to focus their monotonous activity especially on his hearing. Extraordinary recollections swept him. He remembered having heard an old nurse, Sarah Teal, describe how her aunt once rushed out the back door right in the midst of frying doughnuts, and was instantly stricken with paralysis on account of it. There was a low groaning. A moan floated to him from somewhere above. Bravely he forced himself to climb the stairs toward it. He turned the knob. The door stuck. He shook it again, and it yielded. 2. It was nearly dark when he awoke. A very late, and unnaturally late afternoon dusk shadowed in streaks across the floor. He could hardly breathe. The windows were close shut. The striped shades were drawn down to the sills, but he could see the yellowed print of Da Vinci's Last Supper, the one he had bought at Milan, hanging on the panel above the empty hearth. There was the sand shaker on his maple desk. That old lithograph of the 2 kittens over beside the bureau was crooked. He must remember to straighten it. The wallpaper was getting dingy. He stretched himself. A sharp pain was going through his head, but it was late. He must get up and dress, or he wouldn't be ready in time. The clothes he had just taken off lay across an arm of the painted chair by his bed. He lifted the coat and let it fall from his grasp. He moved over to the washstand. The Chinese pitcher was as light as if filled with air when he turned its nose to the basin. The hat tub stood on end between the washstand and the closet door. He reached for the battered old red tassel of the bell rope and pulled it. It was so late. It was getting later. He must hurry, whether Simpkins came or not. He could manage, and he opened the closet door, sighing at the bothersome prospect of getting into his togs. He ran his hand over his hair. Where was the mirror? And damn, he had no light. The shoes were a trifle hard to draw on, too small for him. The breeches were badly in need of pressing. The coat was stiff. He began opening drawers in the bureau, delving through piles of neatly folded linen and silk. At last he chose a shirt and put it on over his head. He laid aside the purple satin waistcoat until he should have arranged his stock, which he found tight and difficult to make meet in the back. But he finally got it adjusted. He brought the thick, wide ends around in front, tied them in a huge bow, while he walked over to the window and gazed out. Fine night. The mist had gone. The stars were dimly appearing. He turned back for his waistcoat and jacket. By mistake, he opened the closet door again instead of the one which led into the hall. "I knew you would come," she said, approaching so near to him from out the somber blackness of the garments which draped the walls that he could see her quite plainly by the light of the candle in her hand. She wasn't a day over 20. If she was pale, it was more the pallor of fright than of ill health, or perhaps only because her skin showed so white, lighted by the faint glare, in contrast to her deep eyes and to the thick glossy braids bound round and round above her forehead. John, won't you speak to me?" He took a step forward, faltering. At that moment there was a brusque movement beside him, and he turned to behold there a young man, dressed in knee breeches, wearing a purple waistcoat and velvet coat as like unto himself as his own image. "Duty bade me come," the stranger answered stiffly, as if it was for his ears that her words had been intended. Hastings' gaze flew to meet hers, which he was astonished to find still directed on him instead of on the speaker. He felt himself melted to pity by her frailness and beauty and charm, so that he turned almost angrily toward the intruder, who at that moment, however, began to address her in tones Hastings could but admire. "To you," cried out the young stranger, "you for whom duty knows no promptings." At that Hastings turned to her again, his heart rent by the plea she uttered. "But you love me, oh, say it to me!" And she was looking not at his counterpart, she was imploring him, she was stretching her arms out to him, she was veritably making her plea to him, as if he were the one who had elicited it. "I will do anything for you, anything," he would have promised her, had not the threat of the stranger so like unto himself interrupted. "Don't mock my patience, Lydia," Hastings heard as once more he shifted his eyes to the speaker. It was maddening how from one to the other of them his sympathies veered. The sepulchral voice of the man seemed to express Hastings' own thoughts, yet her sweet appeal awoke resentful fury for what words he dared say to her. If only Hastings might explain, when she stared so reproachfully that it was only he who had spoken. Momentarily at a loss, she put the candle down on a little shelf. She rubbed her hands one about the other, as if her doing so might lessen the affront which she had now somehow to meet. When at last she spoke, her calm, even tones were like the loveliness of primroses. Her eyes were brimming with simple trustfulness. "You own me, O my husband," she said. Heart, body, and soul, do with me what you will." Why should she be so abject? But when Hastings heard the voice of that other, he was again awed by it. "Think not that I haven't avenged myself," the voice sneeringly proclaimed. Hastings looked. For the first time he noticed that the stranger's arm was in a sling. There was a mole on the cheek near the corner of those tightly compressed lips. She shook like a leaf in a gale. For dread minutes she faced Hastings tremblingly. Coming nearer to him, she murmured, "Are you badly hurt, my husband?" Hastings glanced down at his own arm, on which her eyes seemed to rest. Then he suddenly beheld, almost as one beholds oneself in a mirror, his counterpart recoil from her reach, while he exclaimed scornfully, Don't touch me, nor pray think that your wiles will ever win from me any forgiveness." She stopped stock still. "Is he dead?" she demanded. "Ah, then you do admit, do you, that you love him?" the other flung at her. Say it to me," he charged, and he half closed his eyes. "Or, by heaven, I will—" Hastings felt the justice of this accusation, and turned doubtingly back to the girl for her answer. She stared at him, waiting. "What is the use?" she asked in despair. "Would you believe me?" "If you confess, I will believe you," stated the stranger. It seemed to Hastings that she grew visibly taller. Her face underwent a spasm of pain, and apparently unable longer to remain silent, she cried out to him, "Can it be that for you a confession is more to be believed than aught which has not to be confessed?" And Hastings could feel the touch of her hand cold on his wrist. But the other insisted so convincingly that Hastings looked at him once more with confidence. "The truth," she said sadly, "is only for those who have faith. You prefer the sinner whom you may crush into a penitent. Your egotism demands the power to forgive. You have not the courage to love." The stranger took a step nearer her, but she was looking at Hastings. "He is the only one who is worthy to believe me. He whom you blame me for loving. I do love him, then, but with a love no codes of yours can understand, for I am innocent, to use the word by which you forgivingly call the unjustly accused." Hastings quailed beneath the bitterness of her irony. He saw, too, how the man who so resembled him fell back against an old calico bag, stuffed with remnants probably, that hung on a hook right behind where he had been standing. But when he faced her once more, he marveled at the change in her appearance. Her brows were raised, contracted gently, resolutely. Her eyes were yearningly fixed on Hastings. Her lips were parted tenderly for the generous appeal she had at last found the need to make to him. "Forgive me, oh my husband," she begged. "Nothing can come between us, nothing shall. But I could not love you as I do if I loved not others. If, for the chance love that came my way, I should give in exchange no thanks. You understand me? You would not have me avoid what I was made to love. You would not have me disregard the sunlight and the sea and the stars in the sky. Yes, it is true, my husband. I loved him. He said that my fingers on the spinnet made into harmony all the discords of the day. He said that I wove them away with the notes of birds and the sound of running brooks and the sighing of the wind into patterns, as in the long winter evenings I could spin flax at my wheel. It made me happy to have him love me. It filled me with strength. It taught me many new things I could do for you. John, John, say that you forgive me." Though Hastings wanted to take her in his arms, he was impelled to turn away from her and to view that silent figure still leaning against the calico bag, whose head was lifted haughtily in deference to her supplication. "He loved you too," she continued to Hastings, "because you loved me. He did not mean to kiss me." She just raised her hands, as if involuntarily, and let them fall at her sides. "You thought that he was stealing me from you. He couldn't. He can't. And nobody can, now nor ever." His kiss was as pure as the perfume of lilies, pressed close to breathe. It but made sweeter your love and mine, your life and mine. "Adulteress! With my curses go to him, then, forever!" The cry brought Hastings round to that other whose presence he had forgotten. But next moment she was down before him. Hastings felt her arms tight clasped about his knees. "My husband, listen to me," she implored. There is somebody else to be considered." Hastings shuddered. You and I, shall be the parents of a child. I have not told you. For the sake of our child, from you, that child's father, I must ask forgiveness." She bowed her head sobbingly against Hastings. He put his hand on her hair and was drawing her up to him when the stranger rushed forward to tear her fiercely away. "Lies! Lies!" the stranger ranted. "Go to him, I tell you, his child, his mistress shall not dishonor my house. Go to him, for he isn't dead, and he needs you, you who are not needed here." Don't, she screamed out to Hastings. "I am your wife, the mother of your—" Hastings sprang toward her. He saw that her hands were raised straight up in the air. Just as he was about to reach forth to her, the stranger plunged before him, caught the gray chiffon from her shoulders, and pressed it madly on her throat. Hastings leaped upon him, pulled him away, pinned him to the floor, rolled over him. She had gone. The room was in darkness. Hastings felt for the door. It yielded. He opened another door and stepped through it. His head swam in the midst of the lights outside. He slunk back like one who hesitates to confront the unknown. The stairs were there before him. He began to descend, his right hand held forth, his eyes fastened in horror upon it. Then, as he heard the distant hum of voices below, once more pompous and erect, he swung down the last broad treads between the landing and the floor. A servant who passed uttered a cry and vanished, but that did not deter him. With long strides he boldly rounded the familiar corner to the dining-room door and entered. He flourished his right hand wildly in the air. He saw that it was bleeding. "See, see," he called to them. "At last he is dead. I have killed him. I have killed him." The room seemed to recede in the distance. Something snapped inside his brain. Everything was different. Mr. and Mrs. Elliot, with shrieks of terror, were moving to the pantry door far at the other end. Confusedly, he saw Julia try to force herself toward him, saw her half come, heard his name on her lips. He wanted to smile. He wanted to bend down over her affectionately. But when he sought to reach her with his bloody hand, she shrank back, turned, and fled with the others. He shouted to them, but he stumbled and thought he might fall. He caught hold of the table. After that all was blackness. He awoke amid the appointments of the chamber which Julia had called his room. A quick flood of memories, some clear and accurate, others vague and troublesome, inundated his tired consciousness. Gradually he became aware of a thick, muddy pain rolling in dreadful rhythmic waves through his head. He looked toward the clock on the mantelpiece to see if it wasn't time to get up. He met the eyes of Mrs. Elliot. He lifted himself, falling back on the pillow. The pillow was as cold as ice. She came over to him. "Dear boy, you feel better?" "Better, better," he echoed. "Why are you here?" "Your head is cooler. My dear child, you may as well know it. You fainted yesterday. You were worn out. You caught cold and had a chill. You hadn't eaten anything not since." She fondled the bedclothes. "You'll be all right now. Your head struck something. The doctor said you weren't to talk." It hurt him to move his eyes. The sockets ached. He tried hard to realize what she had told him, repeating snatches of it feverishly over to himself. "Is it dangerous?" he finally got to the point of asking. "No, just a very slight concussion." "Concussion?" He floundered in the ominous meaning of it until Julia came in. Every time he spoke, they begged him not to. She looked so real to him, so natural, so tangibly alive. When she put her face down by his, he trembled and burst out crying like a child. He was afraid she would go away. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands about one of his. The other hand lay bandaged on the counterpane. The next day he was better, but he wasn't allowed to get up, and he was secretly not sorry not to have to try. The weakness which followed the first shock had made him submissive to the situation. He began to be used to the fact that he was ill. Even the nurse's presence he philosophically accepted, so resigned was he to the necessity. He asked questions concerning his pulse and temperature, wanted to know if the bags of ice could be dispensed with soon. Julia read aloud to him for an hour every morning. But by having a half-attentive interest in what she read, he would look fixedly at her and try to piece together his jumbled recollections, partly from lack of strength, mostly because he was loath to admit to anybody that his brain wasn't normally clear. He let the questions which rose to his lips pass unuttered. Once he exclaimed irrelevantly, "Where, Julia, did that portrait come from?" And when he caught the intensity of her stare, he looked around the walls and, smiling bashfully, concealed his embarrassment by saying, "I'm really listening, but I must have dozed for a second." At times he would gaze wonderingly at the ceiling, lose himself following the lines of the panels, or counting the little square panes in the window sashes. He sometimes slept, but not quite soundly. Half his somnolence was busy with irrational calculations beyond his control. A musty smell elusively kept fading as soon as he was aware of breathing it. A dim room, in which the windows were shut close and the shades pulled down, drifted through his quick fancy into darkness. He would find himself deliriously sorting many strange garments into piles, counting them, opening drawers to take others out, until the accumulations drove him to despair. His right hand throbbed under the tight bandage. He kept fingering the bandage and pressing on the sore spots. Everything about him would seem suddenly definite and real, as compared with the dismal bewilderment of his dreamings. Perhaps the doctor would enter, with professional cheerfulness, but then, right in the middle of answering some question, Hastings would be blinded by a great rush of bright light through the open door. A day came when all this phantasmagoria ceased to bother him. With returning vigor he had to make less and less effort to forget it, until at last it altogether went. The joy of new health swept over him, filling the gaps and low miasmic areas of his mentality as the rising tide fills the empty pools of the shore. End of section 11, read by Martha Weller, Champaign, Illinois, June 1st, 2023.